Welcome to the second of 5 videos about AQA GCSE English Language Paper 1. My name is Miss Kilbenbond and I work with all the English teachers across the Athelston Trust. I'm hoping that this video will help you understand question 2 in particular. If you look at those learning objectives, if you watch all 5 videos as part of you understanding the overall format of this paper, revising the priorities for each question and developing a strategy to apply to each answer. And the text that this is being based on actually comes from a children's book. If you watch the first video, then you'll hear me reading this extract and talking about it in a little bit more detail. If you haven't seen that, then you could just pause here now. Okay, so let's start looking then at question 2. Look in detail at this extract from lines 7 to 11 of the source, and then on the exam paper those lines 7 to 11, or whichever lines they choose, will actually be reprinted in a box on your question paper, which makes it nice and easy for you. Really important though, that if you're being asked to focus on one particular part of a text, you don't then start talking about something outside of that extract, because that won't help you. So in the box we've got lines 7 to 11. Let's have a read of that now. This is the moment that Sam, the little man, sees the sea for the very first time. The little man could only stare. He hadn't dreamed of the bigness of the sea. He hadn't dreamed of the blueness of it. He hadn't thought it would roll like kettle drums and swish itself onto the beach. He opened his mouth, and the drift and the dream of it, the weave and the wave of it, the fume and foam of it, never left him again. At his feet the sea stroked the sand with soft little paws. Farther out, the great graceful breakers moved like kings into court, trailing the peacock-patterned sea behind them. And the question, how does the writer use language here to describe the sea? You could include the writer's choice of words and phrases, language features and techniques, sentence forms, and this is for 8 marks. How does the writer use language here to describe the sea? So this is a question that's all about language analysis, one of those very basic skills that you will have been building up to throughout your school life when you're looking at English. And it is 8 marks and should only be taking you around 10 minutes. So lots of students spending half an hour on this and then getting in a muddle with the rest of the paper. You need to practice and train yourself to be able to look at an extract of about this length and be able to write in 10 minutes. And that's something that you do need to train yourself to do. It's not going to happen on the day if you've not practiced doing it beforehand. So that's a little bit of a revision tip for English there. The question's always going to be the same. How does the writer use language here too? And then obviously the latter part of that question will depend on what the text is about. So easy to write your own if you're revising. How does the writer use language here to describe the sea? And those bullet points are there to give you some help. You don't have to stick to them. You're not going to be marked down if you don't comment on all 3 of those things, but they're there as a little bit of a nudge, a little bit of hint in the right direction. So what I've done here is I've got that extract again, but I have put some of those sentences, phrases, images in different colours. And why I've done that is because I'm trying to show you that the first thing that you would do in an exam, you'd look at the question, you'd think, right, I'm only looking in this section for something that's describing the sea. And with a highlighter or a coloured crayon, it would be a great idea to then go through and highlight or underline which quotes might be able to help you answer the question. So I'm only looking for the things that describe the sea. So you can see in purple I've got the bigness of the sea, the blueness of it, and then I've also in purple got peacock patterned. Really good technique is to try and pull and link ideas together rather than seeing each quote as something in isolation, as something on its own. I'll explain to you why I've put those together in a minute. Then in green I've put together roll like kettle drums and then the swish, so the noises of the sea as the waves are crashing onto the beach. Then in red I've got that longer phrase, drift and dream of it, the weave and the wave of it, the fume and foam of it, never left him again. And then finally I've used the blue to link together the sea stroked the sand with soft little paws, and great graceful breakers moved like kings into court. So that's my first part of answering this question. I've gone to the extract and I've tried to look for images that I think, oh, they work like a team together, they're quite nice, and I've highlighted them in different colours. And what you can see there is a snip of where I've actually done that in handwriting and with highlighters. So what you notice is that as well as colour coding them, I've started to annotate around the outside with some of my ideas. So next to bigness, I've put big, blue, peacock patterned, all as being visual senses, all linked to what the sea looks like. And then underneath that, we've got simile labelled, roll like kettle drums, swish I've labelled as onomatopoeia, and then I've got those two arrows joining those ideas together where I've put sound senses. They're all about the sound of the sea rather than what it looks like. And I've just put the words music power because as I'm thinking, I was wanting to point out to myself, oh, I might be able to say something about the sea having this musical quality. And then I've circled the D of drift and dream, the W of weave and wave, the F of fume and foam to remind myself that I could comment on the alliteration there. And I've also labelled there's the rhythm of the tide because I think if you listen to that pattern, the drift and the dream of it, the weave and the wave of it, the fume and the foam of it, sounding like the tide going in and out. In the yellow, we've got the sea stroke the sand. I've labelled that as personification and I've just made a note for myself. Oh, I think I'd like to talk about that, making it sound kind and affectionate. I've put gentle next to that image of the soft little paws. And then I've again noticed there's alliteration with great and graceful. I've noticed that there's a simile for moved like kings and the idea of this being a powerful, a regal image. And then finally, I've labelled the alliteration in peacock patterned and just put the word beauty there just to jog my thoughts before I start writing my answer. But what's important are those three questions that are underneath. And these three questions are going to help you go into this question and write really well. And if you find it easier to remember pictures, the three pictures are going to then jog your memory in that exam so you can remember what these questions are asking. So the first picture is of somebody looking through a magnifying glass. What is the writer showing us? That's what you're being asked to do in this question. You're being asked to find some language, put it under the magnifying glass that describes the sea and think, what is the writer showing us? That's our starting point. That's our first step on the ladder. The next picture is of a toolbox, but if you look closely, the toolbox hasn't got spanners and hammers in, it's actually got paper and pens and pencils. That's because a writer's toolbox is filled with everything that you need to create imagery, is filled with techniques like simile and metaphor and personification and alliteration. So the question is, how is the writer showing us this? So not what the writer is showing us now, but building on that and trying to explain how the writer has created that idea. What techniques, how has language been used to create that imagery? And when we've got those two ideas working together, we're then able to ask that final question, which has got the picture of somebody looking a little bit startled by what they're reading. Why is the writer showing us this? Because if we miss that last stage out, we're not really thinking about the impact of the writer's techniques. If we want to say something about what a writer's doing and how a writer does it, then to close that lovely pattern we have to say, but why do that? How is it going to make us as the reader react? So 3 questions, very straightforward for you to learn and link to this question. 3 pictures as a memory prompt to help you do that. So let's just remind ourselves of the question. How does the writer use language here to describe the sea? So we've got our 3 questions along the bottom of the screen. What is the writer showing us? The magnifying glass. How is the writer showing us this? Which tools from the toolbox? Why is the writer showing us this? Thinking about reader reaction. I'm going to share with you now a model as to how that might sound. The writer creates a sense of the enormity of the sea's power and beauty being more impressive than Sam could ever have imagined. That paragraph is in red because it links to the question at the bottom, what is the writer showing us? And now as we go through, you can see how this colour coding is working, and it might be that it's helpful to pause the screen at the end and just think about how each section links to the questions. Sensory images are used to create this idea, as Sam hadn't dreamed of the bigness or the blueness of it. Later in this extract, the writer describes the sea as peacock patterned, which suggests that the blue is not all exactly the same shade, but is as colourful as the feathers of a bird, which is renowned for its beautiful coloured feathers. The writer also uses sound imagery to add this to this sense of the sea as powerful, but also enchanting. The simile, roll like kettle drums, adds a musical quality to the loud noise of the crashing waves, and this is enhanced by the onomatopoeia swish to describe the sound of the waves as they reach the beach. It is clear to the reader that being at the seaside has overwhelmed Sam's senses. The sea is so beautiful in both appearance and sound that he is left mesmerised and speechless. So plenty of words there that have been put under the magnifying glass. So if you look in red at how many quotations we've included, we've got bigness, blueness, peacock patterned, roll like kettle drums, swish. All of those words have been put under the magnifying glass for me as the writer to then start analysing what the impact of them is. If we look at the toolkit, then we've got some words there that talk to us about how the writer has shown this. So we've got sensory imagery, we've got alliteration, we've got simile, we've got onomatopoeia. It doesn't have to be these technical words. It's great if you can identify them and use them correctly, but what's important is that you can just say something about the how, even if you're not sure if there's a technical word for that same technique. And then in green you can see where I've tried to talk about the effect on the reader, what the reader might be thinking, feeling, predicting, wondering because of what we've put under the magnifying glass, because of how the writer has presented something. So I'm hoping there's a really straightforward way of approaching this question and reflecting on what you've written. And when you're revising, a really good thing to do would be to annotate using colour your answer, using those three, what is the writer showing us, how is the writer showing us this, why is the writer showing us this. If you've got all three colours in your annotated piece, then you're doing well. If there's a colour missing, that's something that you could clearly work on. Now, I've done a little bit more here as another example. In 5 minutes, you will all have different amounts that you can write depending on how quickly you can think this through and write. You only need to have maybe kind of 3 key images to be able to do well in this question. I've done more here just to try and keep giving you ideas to reflect on. So again, look at the colour coding, it's exactly the same. Look at how all of these things work together to explain how the writer uses language to describe the sea. Adding to this sense that the sea is mesmerising, the writer describes the experience of the sounds and sights of the sea as something that is unforgettable. The writer uses alliteration to pair up images of the sea, drift and dream, weave and wave, fume and foam, and these are listed in a repetitive, rhythmic way that echoes the sound that waves make as they come up the beach and then retreat again. Although the sea is clearly powerful, the writer doesn't want it to sound dangerous, and so she personifies the sea as something gentle when a wave reaches Sam's feet. The sea stroked the sand with soft little paws. Stroking has connotations of being affectionate and calming, and the soft little paws make the reader imagine a harmless animal. The waves further out are bigger and more powerful, but the writer still makes sure that they're seen as majestic rather than frightening. The simile, moved like kings into court, creates this sense that the waves are to be respected rather than feared for their power. The reader is invited to feel similarly spellbound by the beauty of the sea as something that is both great and graceful. So you should be able to spot plenty of those techniques, how the writer's showing us this. You should be able to spot lots of the what, the quotations, the words that are being put under that magnifying glass, and then in the green, every time, rather than just identifying something, I'm trying to explain why has the writer done this? What's it going to make me as the reader think, feel, imagine, react, etc. And that brings us to the end of the video about question 2. Hopefully that gives you a really straightforward way in which you can revise the priorities for each question, and you've now got a strategy through those 3 questions that you could apply in your own answer. Thanks for listening.